Hello everyone, today you see just the two of us here, but the Oued Beht archaeological project is co-directed as well by our Moroccan colleague, Youssef Bokbot, Professor of Prehistory at the National Institute of Archaeology and Heritage, INSAP, in Rabat. I'm Cyprian Broodbank, Disney Professor of Archaeology and Director of the MacDonald Institute here in Cambridge. I've worked much of my life on the long-term archaeology and the deep history of the Mediterranean, in Greece and Cyprus and elsewhere. And I'm equally interested in comparative global approaches to things like connectivity and islands.
And I'm Giulio Lucarini, Senior Researcher at the Institute of Heritage Science of the National Research Council of Italy and a lecturer in prehistory at the University of Naples L'Orientale. My research focuses on human adaptation to the environment and the origins of food production. Over the past 30 years, I have conducted research in Morocco, in Egypt, Libya, and Tunisia, and I currently co-direct several international projects in North Africa, including the Oued Beht archaeological project.
So what is the Maghreb? Well, there are many overlapping geographical and political definitions of a term that reflects the perceptions really of early Islamic geography as a virtual island at the western extremity of their world. We take it to denote Northwest Africa, between the Sahara and the sea, a huge and a fascinating region, much of which presents a broadly Mediterranean landscape and environment comparable to that of southern Spain, from the towering Atlas mountain barrier through to the long Atlantic and Mediterranean coastlines. It's one of those provocative areas where continents and oceans meet.
So why so important? The Maghreb has long been recognized as one of the earliest homelands of Homo sapiens, of our species. We are talking about around 300,000 years ago. But its later role in later prehistory, before the arrival of the colonial powers, is equally fascinating, is equally very important. It is positioned between the Atlantic, the Sahara, the Mediterranean, and it serves as a natural crossroads, first for hunter-gatherers, then for groups of herders, and then eventually for farming communities arriving from Iberia. Our research at Oued Beht reveals that 5,000 years ago, the Maghreb was not a marginal outpost, as often portrayed, unfortunately, but a vibrant region fully engaged in Mediterranean cultural and economic exchange. And this, in a way, challenges the whole picture of North Africa as isolated. In other words, far from being a forgotten corner, the Maghreb was a very busy hub, more a prehistoric roundabout than a cul-de-sac, if you like. For decades, the Maghreb, between 4000 and 1000 BCE, was an historical blind spot, actually. While Egypt, the Levant, the Aegean, and Iberia were studied intensively, Western North Africa was curiously absent from the grand narratives of Mediterranean prehistory. The main reason possibly lies in the scarcity of systematic research. Many sites were either overlooked or only superficially recorded, and archaeological attention was drawn eastwards to Egypt's spectacular monuments. As a result, the region was too often seen as peripheral, socially and culturally marginal. In truth, this was more a reflection of our own scholarly gaps than of ancient realities. So Oued Beht provides the missing voice in that silence, showing that complex agricultural societies did indeed flourish here, participating actively in the wider Mediterranean dynamics.
Well, for really as long as Mediterranean archaeology has existed, it has suffered from a really chronic imbalance between the wealth of knowledge and significance attached to finds along the northern shores, especially in the cases of Greece and Rome and Italy more generally, and a contentment with the relative state of ignorance concerning the southern shore, at least west of Egypt. This bred an assumption with strong colonial and more broadly hegemonic underpinnings that agency and change and history were properties of those who lived on the northern shore, who over time imposed them on the south. This clearly cannot stand, and archaeology is the best way of rectifying this imbalance and bringing the Maghreb forcefully into the grand interpretation and explanation of overall long-term Mediterranean dynamics.
So we focus our research on Oued Beht, a Neolithic site in central Morocco, discovered in the 30s but long neglected. The site is enormous. We are talking about 10 hectares, similar in size to early Bronze Age Troy, and sits on a ridge overlooking a permanent river, which made it ideal, especially for farming activities. It was probably closer to outlets on the Atlantic than it is today. And since 2021, our international team has combined advanced methods, including drone mapping, intensive field walking, and targeted stratigraphic excavation, together with studies of plant and animal remains, pottery, and lithics. What we found is extraordinary. Storage pits, polished stone axes, grinding stones, domestic crops, animals, and painted pottery, all of them pointing to a well-organized farming community, which is radiocarbon dated from mid-4th to the 3rd millennium BCE.
This wealth of material and information is really crucial in two respects. First, for the first time, we have a clear view of how people lived over 5,000 years ago, at least at the western end of the Maghreb, and what their material world looked like, so that we might recognize it elsewhere. Secondly, it clearly points to long-range connections south over the Atlas into the Sahara, in the form of highly distinctive groundstone tools, and perhaps more stridently and obviously to maritime interaction with communities in southern Spain and in Portugal. The latter has long been suspected on the basis of ivory and ostrich egg finds, but now we glimpse the African actors in this trade, and moreover, we think that the abundant locally made painted pottery at Oued Beht may well explain sporadic finds of such long ago found north of the sea. They're massive. This is an emphatically indigenous African society, and indeed the largest and the earliest farming community known on the continent outside the Nile Valley. It was an active participant in the creation of widespread Mediterranean networks, and it also maintained links back into the Sahara. Oued Beht demonstrates that already more than 5,000 years ago, the Maghreb was far from simply a passive area waiting for civilization, however we define that, to arrive in the guise of Phoenicians and Greeks and Romans, but rather with its own indigenous developments and contributions to the formation of both Mediterranean and African societies. Thinking of the present moment, it sends a vital message from the distant past that North Africa and Southern Europe have been talking and interacting for millennia, with the Mediterranean as their shared Middle Sea. And that matters a lot.
Oh, this is very exciting. I mean, because despite the progress, very important questions remain. Was Oued Beht a permanent village or a central node within a larger network of scattered communities? Or was its society internally organized? And did it display class specialization or a trading role? And how extensive were its connection with Iberia to the north and the Sahara to the south? We still don't know. So our future research will include geophysical surveys, for example, to identify buried structures and possibly cemetery areas, renewed excavation in unexplored areas, and wider regional surveys to better contextualize Oued Beht in its landscape. This investigation will also be supported by more scientific analysis like isotopic and genetic analysis, helping us to reconstruct diet, mobility, and ancestry. So the story continues. Though our witnesses have remained silent for 6 millennia, keeping us eager for every clue they might yet reveal.